As I was just saying, I have the great pleasure of introducing community-based journalism outlets in 7 unique contexts across the globe. And I actually thought before starting off, I'd like to make a note, maybe more of an observation or a reminder to myself, because this thought has obviously crossed my mind more than a couple of times over the past days. How do you find the courage to present a panel after Maria Ressa? Well, most of us, I think all of us, were listening to her speak. And I would say it is pretty clear, to me at least, how you do it. You simply follow, you remain focused on what good journalism is. You feel quite assured that it is possible to accomplish. And you feel a large bout of humility because someone has already done it. Just one of the greatest of the greats, and has done it with odds stacked against her. So in the spirit of that sentiment, I thought I'd take a brief moment. We'll be focusing on our panelists, but I'd like to introduce to you Report for the World, which should be coming up on that slide shortly, which is a program that I'm thrilled to be part of. And I'm working with a fantastic team of colleagues, many of whom are present here today in the room at the GroundTruth Project. And let me think of another, I'm reminded of another saying it's become at our institution, which is that the crisis in journalism is local, but it's also global. As aptly summed up by the founder at GroundTruth Project, Charles Sennett, who's here. And Report for the World is our direct response, a scalable one at that helps newsrooms with an independent public interest journalism focus to pair up with reporters who are covering some of the most critical issues, yet undercovered issues across the globe. And we are scalable because we've added 5 new countries, as you can see on the map. Very excited to share that we're now present in Mexico, Peru, Hungary, Ukraine, Zimbabwe, in addition to India, Brazil, and Nigeria, where we started and continue to deepen our relationships. And then, of course, this is in addition to our sister program here, Report for America, which has successfully placed over 300 reporters in local newsrooms in all of the states of the US. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our very first speaker. And let me get the pronunciation right. That's Nwabisa Makunga at Sowetan in South Africa. Nwabisa, you are with an outlet that has this incredible legacy, became a formidable voice in Johannesburg and Soweto that were reeling under the impact of the apartheid. And while you've grown to become a very large organization at a national level, you keep your community focus, community reporting. How do you maintain the connections between the social issues in these very specific neighborhoods and the social issues at a national level? And I should remind the audience that Sowetan started as a liberation newspaper in 1981, is that right? Please run us through the story.
So, I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. Is it on? So Sowetan was established in 1981, 41 years ago in South Africa. It was really at the time, a publication started by just a group of journalists, predominantly Black, who wanted a platform that they could not only identify with, but that the people that they were serving at the time could actually relate to. So a platform that really served what was predominantly Black and marginalized communities in South Africa at the time. And obviously you would understand, the context of South Africa at the time. And I think that's really where its roots are at. It's a publication, and it has grown, over the years, over the next 40 years, a publication that is very much rooted in the community, right? But also its stance just in South Africa, it's an activism brand. So it's a publication that agitates for social justice, that agitates for development, of those communities. It's also a platform that celebrates, excellence that comes from those communities. So, I mean, our kind of outlook is, when we sum it up in one phrase, we say, know your place. And it's really a play on how particularly Black people in South Africa at the time were told, know your place, and your place is in the, sit in the corner and say nothing. And we flip it around and we actually say your place is at the head of the table, not at the foot of the table. Your place is wherever you want it to be, because not only are you liberated, but you actually have a right and everything that is within you to fight for whatever it is that you want to become. And so it's really got that kind of platform. So you asked the question about how do we maintain our connection with the community while also keeping a national outlook, on things. One, I mean, our journalists, for example, they live in the communities in which, we serve. So we will write about, the issues. I mean, in South Africa, for example, crime and safety and security is a big thing. So we will write about the issues of safety that happen in a particular community and kind of really zoom into that, but also be able to take that story and ask the minister, of police or whatever the case may be, why is it that at that police station, there's only X number of police? Why is it that at that, in that community, there's not so many resources that enable people to be able to fight crime? So it's a tricky balance, because on the one hand, because we've now become a national publication, there's an expectation for us to kind of speak at that level. But I think what we've managed to do, and hopefully quite well, is really keep it local while holding those who are in power in national level accountable for really what happens at grassroots level. So that's really our story in a nutshell.
Know your place, and that's such a great play on words, and it is about knowing the places where we live and having a closer eye on the issues that directly impact us, and for those stories to be told by reporters who are familiar with the languages and the nuances and the contextual realities. And I think that's a great segue to talk about another platform that started here in New York to serve a Haitian diaspora community, and started by Garry Pierre, who was at the New York Times, a Pulitzer-winning journalist, and decided he was going to focus his energies on something much more specific. But Garry, we're also seeing that there are different communities forming at the moment, in the sense that you have the Haitian community here that's well established and a longer history. There are Haitians who are at the border seeking asylum or wanting to migrate. And then there are those living in Haiti during a period that is particularly challenging in the country's history. So have you started to shift a bit from community-focused journalism to cross-border? What does that transformation look like? What are the challenges that, arrive with that?
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Before I answer that question, I want to go back to the reason why I studied the Haitian Times. Because, like you mentioned, I was at the New York Times. I was the epitome, the Mecca, whatever you want to call it. And everybody was proud of me in the community and the stories that I have written, a few of them, because the Times, not to focus about the Haitian community, but I did some. And if I were to do them today, it would have gone viral, because everybody was just really excited about it. And so then I remember when I was a child, my parents, they had every intention of going back to Haiti, because that was a dream. They came in without the Duvalier regime, then go back home. Then 30 years later, we're still here. And we were no longer an exile group. We were an immigrant group, part of the great mosaic, like former Mayor Dinkins used to talk about New York. And so, but I noticed a trend. There was no media serving that community. It was all about sort of like the politics of Haiti. And how do you navigate New York, the United States? So I did something crazy. I realized there was an opportunity there. And I left the Times to start the Haitian Times, because I truly believe that we will eventually become a significant part of New York. And then you fast forward today, to answer the question, that has borne out. So what we set at the beginning, knowing full and well that the community was going to be spread out across the country, because as much as we loved New York at the time, but it was very cold. Most Haitians didn't. So I knew eventually there'd be migration to Florida. And so when we started the paper, it was with that in mind. We had a bureau in Florida and Miami and New York. And we just started covering the story wherever it was. So when the border crisis happened, thanks to Report for America, we had the resources and the reporters in place to send them to the border. And we followed the migrants all wherever they went. Some went to Illinois, we went there. Some went to stayed in Texas because there's a large Haitian community in Houston. So basically, we were sort of like the original local global. And we covered Haiti because wherever Haitians are around the world, Haiti is what concerns them at the heart, because they are the lifeline of the country. Without the diaspora, I don't think Haiti would be as bad as it may be today. I think it would have been worse to some extent, because they depend on us. And so the Haitian Times is the only voice diaspora writ large. You have pockets, but we look at it globally in terms of wherever Haitians are. That's what we want to do. Now, when we started, that was the idea, but realistically, we couldn't do that because we didn't have the resources. Now, with technology having shifted, our ambition is to be present wherever Haitians are, be it Mexico, which has a little Haiti neighborhood, Brazil, Chile, Canada are well established. So now our game is to really truly be global and while remaining local. We cover Brooklyn, we cover Kimberly Heights and Queens. We cover Little Haiti. I just came from Miami yesterday. And this is the new way that local publications like the Haitian Times can truly have impact and compete to some extent with the big publications worldwide, whether it be The Guardian, the New York Times, the Le Monde. We are able to do that with technology. And so it is a truly exciting time, really, I mean, to be in the space.
And that's a fantastic example of local global connections and through community focused journalism. And that's a thread that we're trying to maintain through this conversation. But at the same time, you're also trying to counter what used to be called, or has been a prevalent approach, which is parachute journalism, right? But I really loved that Kavita Devi called it helicopter journalism, because the community in which she lives in the very heart of India, in Madhya Pradesh, the only time that she had seen journalists arrive was with politicians in a helicopter, get a quick story, usually very tokenistic, and then leave with no contextual realities, with no nuances, without making any of the links between the different things happening. And so Kavita Devi, you're armed with an excellent cohort of reporters and editors who are from Dalit and tribal backgrounds. These are extremely underrepresented and underserved communities in India. And can you tell us a bit of the story of your outlet? It's called Khabar Lahariya, which is waves of news. The understanding there being is that you follow the peaks and the troughs, and that's where you find the real stories. Can you tell us the story, please?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello. Khabar Lahariya started from North Indian rural areas where the issues of marginalized people were not covered by any media. It started as a broadsheet in a literacy program called Mahila Dakiya, which was popular. When it stopped, the people started demanding for it. The areas in forest, mountains, with development issues of water, forest land schemes, caste women, and politics were not considered news by mainstream media. In what if it was reported, it was from a top-down angle, hyper-local, people could not access it. And the ideas of Khabar Lahariya was born. Our newspaper was, our newspaper was in local language, easy to understand by people, with unique font size and handmade pictures, rural issues in local language, covered by women reporters from the community. We used to conduct time-to-time survey and reviews of our content. Our readers grew along with us. There has been talk about the values and goals of Khabar Lahariya in every editorial meeting. We used to conduct production meeting of all the reporters as a part group activity. We used to discuss on every angle and values of the news content in a draft. The team used to decide mutually what kind of news is to be taken up. We used to create a dummy production to deciding final content and then printing and distribution of newspaper is what a full community effort. Our reporters on all full-time salary, local media does not follow this model. But making them financial dependent is a feminist decision. In our team, women are proudly running their homes. Many have bought home land and are capable of providing their children a quality education. So funding is always a challenge. We do not accept ads. We want to stay independent. Thank you.
She just said that's my first time doing it in English, and that's how considerate. And that's how considerate Kavita is, because I'd obviously offered to translate this, and so did Pooja, and she said, you know what? I can do this in English on my own, so bravo. And so what a lot of Kavita is talking about here in terms of the editorial process, it's pretty remarkable how democratic it is. I don't think a lot of newsrooms are as, keep such a close eye on ensuring everyone's voices are heard. And so, Pooja, you are at Chambal Media, which is the umbrella organization, and Khabar Lahariya is a flagship program, correct? And so you're looking more at sort of what does socioeconomic and cultural transformation look like in these communities in rural areas? But at the same time, you're also teaching more technical investigative approaches to storytelling to women who are not necessarily from journalistic backgrounds. What does that look like? And what has the transformation been like? Because your way of your methods of storytelling or formats have changed quite a bit because of digitization. Can you run us through the story?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. So just picking up actually from where Kavita left off, I think, which connects with how it's changing, because Kavita spoke about funding, and I think everybody in this room can resonate with that and at this conference. And it completely links with what does sustainability mean? Like how does an idea become sustainable? We talk about impact and we talk about diversity. And for us, women like me and Kavita run the show here. And we kind of know what that means inside out in so many ways. But how does that last through generations? Because that's when you talk about sustainability and impact and funding, of course. And these were the kinds of questions, Preethi, that we were kind of struggling with when we actually pivoted from a not-for-profit model, where Lahariya initially was in the world of trusts and grants, to a company, which is what Chambal Media is today. It's a registered company. And it came in answer to these questions that actually we found the answers in Khabar Lahariya, or at least the genesis of it in the DNA, which is two things. One is the training, which Preethi, like you rightly said, the training that was brought, that was kind of devised and shaped and created, absolutely unique, completely bottom up from a team, a very diverse team. Kavita herself, I wasn't part of that team, but a team as diverse as like Kavita and me, who actually dreamt up this training. And so we looked at the training part of it and we said, okay, how do we scale this? We're a company now. This is how we need to be thinking. And thus we launched, you can actually run through the slides. And thus we came up with the Chambal Academy, which we recently launched. Feminist Response to Digital Inclusion, which is really to take that training and expand beyond the rural, Bundelkhand, and Northern India, I think. So yeah, so to come back to Chambal Academy, to kind of scale that across. So we did successfully did a Mojo pilot in the throes of the pandemic, which trained 270 young girls and women across 3 states of Northern India. So, beyond Kavita and Meera and Shampali, and there's this fabulous team of women I get to work with, fortunate enough to. But what beyond them, right? So that's what I mean when I say sustainability of the idea. So training was one. The other was just the content. I mean, helicopter reporting, for instance. Why is it that it is so different from the community reporting? And what Nwabisa said, and you said, there is no way that new issues can be understood in the way that you understand when you're from the community, when that ugly word, when you're a stakeholder. I mean, the policies affect you. So the content with Khabar Lahariya, it's news, right? We're disrupting the idea of news and the newsmaker, because what's considered news, right? Is it just what the prime minister is doing? Or is that the hand pump in the village isn't working? That's news if I'm in that village, right? Or that there is a caste issue around that hand pump. That is news. But Khabar Lahariya did that. And the newsmaker, who forever was this upper caste man with a degree, certain amount of access, and then there are women like Kavita who say, no, I'm a newsmaker. I'm a newsmaker. So I think that disrupting the area of news and newsmaker is what Chambal Media, if you could go back to that slide, is what Chambal Media is doing then. Thanks. Is it? Is that again or?
I can hear you, but I'm worried about everyone back here.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Chambal Media, so I was talking about the disruption of news and newsmaker. Is this better? So with Chambal Media, we're expanding that, right? Beyond news. So what other kinds of content can we do? What happens when women like Kavita are making the documentaries? They're no longer the subjects of that story. Because, we're always in that space of women's empowerment. It's a word I don't like, having worked here now, because it's always in that space of, you're the subject and there's some livelihood training that's happening and now you're suddenly empowered. But that's very different from when you're a co-director yourself, when you're a script writer yourself. So kind of disrupting that and expanding it. So to go back to the question, Preethi, to take these two ideas and to try and scale them. So now at Chambal Media, we're looking at documentaries, we're looking at research projects, and we've actually done one with NYU recently. And again, that kind of speaking to the idea of what is knowledge creation? I mean, who gets to create the knowledge and what do we consider knowledge? I mean, we're sitting in a place where, we're hallowed grounds, but are we ready to talk about where the knowledge is coming from? Because otherwise nothing's going to change. If it's always going to be people like me or you who are going to be going to privileged institutions and being able to create knowledge. Nothing against that, but I'm just saying, how do we disrupt it? It will never change unless we do that. So So yeah, going back to the for-profit model, which has been quite the challenge. Yeah, you can move on now. So the question of funding, to connect with what Kavita was saying, looking at different kinds of revenue streams. So for instance, this is a new product that we launched called KL Hatke, which is a subscription product, which is the exciting content of Khabar Lahariya that was primarily for the hyperlocal rural audience, now for a more international audience and for an English-speaking audience in India and outside of India. So looking at that as a revenue stream, and also Chambal Academy, the slide that just went, that's fine, to looking at Chambal Academy subscription plans. Who else can we partner with? We are doing lots of partnerships there. And what else can we do there? So again, because this world of not-for-profit and women's empowerment, we would like to question that also. Why can't it be a for-profit business model, right? And we have not answered that. We are nowhere close to profitable. And I don't think I need to convince anybody here when I say what I mean. You all know what I mean when I say that. But, we're trying. And really, it's like Kavita's determination and motivation and the team that makes you feel like it's worth a shot. We should be trying, the same motivation that made her decide to do this in English today. Thank you.
Thank you for going into the issue of what sustainability means. And I'd like to touch upon that with some of the speakers as a follow-up question. But the thing that you said that struck me was the source of knowledge, right? Where it comes from is going to impact the sort of the future of a community or who the decision makers are. But the other thing that you're doing here is also a cultural shift almost in people both in that community as well as people like us living in urban centers, getting accustomed to the idea of a different profile of a journalist who is a legitimate information provider, who is able to, connect the dots better than my going to one of these communities. And I imagine that kind of thinking would have gone into the Sahan journal while looking at what does representation mean and how do we serve a community that is making its place in Minnesota. So Sahan Journal is a digital publication that has a focus on communities of color and immigrant communities in Minnesota. And Ibrahim Mukhtar is a leading voice in journalism. He himself, from a Somali background, is quite well connected, right, to different multicultural communities. And you're a unifying figure. And you've taken many different approaches to building audiences, to creating sustainability, from conferences to, even teaming up with mainstream media. So how have you approached sort of intersecting interests between these different communities? For example, I saw that you've done some great coverage of Somali youth supporting Black Lives Matter in the aftermath of the police killing of George Floyd. Could you talk a little bit more about that intersectionality and what does growth and sustainability mean to the Sahan Journal?
Yeah, so before I started Sahan Journal, I was a reporter for some of the largest media outlets in Minnesota, including Minnesota Public Radio, which is one of the largest radio stations in the country, and the Star Tribune, one of the best newspapers in the country. And throughout my career, I realized that our colleagues and peers in the media have been undercovering communities of color, immigrants, and refugees who have been really deepening their roots in Minnesota. For those of you who don't know Minnesota, it's very welcoming to refugees and immigrants. It has very good social programs that supports new people who come to the country. And when I moved to Minnesota with my family from East Africa, people of color in general made up around 8% of the state's population. And the 2020 census showed that communities of color now make up 24%. So these communities are really growing, bringing richness and diversity to the state, helping retain population growth, and make sure that these communities are being shown in the media, and that hasn't been happening. So the idea of Sahan Journal actually was born throughout my when I was building my career in those newsrooms, because I have seen that some of the most prominent stories that come out of these communities is when something big happens, like the killing of George Floyd, or when some youth are arrested for trying to join a tourist group outside, the country, or when a fire breaks out in a place that's predominantly Somali or Hmong or Latino. And I knew there were more stories beyond that. There were stories that are really ignored or overlooked or sometimes misrepresented in the community, in the media. And I just wanted to see a place that can go beyond that and be out in the community and establish trust, and reporters need to show up in those communities. So we launched Sahan Journal with the idea of chronicling the struggles, successes, challenges, and how these communities are really transforming the state in terms of politics, culture, economy, arts and culture, and everything else. And we actually built our newsroom with 3 core members from Report for America, were our founding members. And we launched in 2019, and we brought in some of the first hires in the middle of the pandemic. But that allowed us to really befit our mission and make sure that we are providing essential information to communities who are most impacted by the pandemic. So we partnered with community organizations, nonprofit organizations, community figures to provide information real time in multiple languages, especially languages that are not published in the government websites or Minnesota Department of Health, or the rest of the media wasn't providing, such as, we provide a lot of information in Somali, Hmong, Spanish, and Oromo. Those are some of the largest immigrant communities who don't get the news, live news in their own native languages. And we also did multimedia coverage in around the coronavirus vaccine, trying to answer, basic questions. Does the vaccine contain any pork elements? Because most, Muslims are prohibited from consuming anything that has pork in it. And just, providing that essential information to communities. And the way we did was, we tried to really understand the informational needs of our communities. We are not assuming when we go to the communities, or we are not, trying to come up with our own story ideas. We are trying to help make sure the community is shaping our editorial coverage so that what we do meets the informational needs, what they need to know. And we did that by just doing events, talking to the community, and reimagining what a beat will look like. When we talk about beats, I think we imagine someone sitting in an office or trying to, talk to officials and all that. But the real beat actually comes when you are out on the ground and present in coffee shops and going to events and going to the churches and mosques and basically showing up in the community so that your face is known, and you're not just showing up when something bad happens or when a tragedy strikes, but you are there in the community when things are going on normally. And that's the way we really establish presence. And our stories have, won awards, and our reporters became some of the best journalists in the state. And we established partnerships with some of the major media outlets in the state, and they republish our stories on the front page and air on the radio. And because no one was providing that deep coverage that was missing in the local media. Our organization is a nonprofit. That means we rely on support from major foundations in the state and across the country. We also rely on contributions from our readers who come to our website. So if you come to our website and you really love our mission, you give us $10 a month or $100 or $50. And that has been really doing well for us because people understand the value of the journalism that you're bringing to the community. And our membership program has been written about by Institute for Nonprofit News. We are becoming sustainable because of our growth in membership. We also rely on advertisement and sponsorships from businesses, government agencies who try to reach these communities that are really growing in Minnesota. So they put their products in front of the audience and they try to establish that connection to our readers, and they place advertisement and sponsorships on our website, and that has been a good source of revenue for organization. But we largely depend on grants from foundations in Minnesota and across the country.
Well, thank you for those concrete examples of diversifying revenue. It is a big question for most independent media, but also for the concrete examples for reminding us really that community media becomes an essential and at times life-saving service in cases like the COVID crisis. And if I were to think of another community that would have been disproportionately affected by lack of information or a lack of access during the pandemic, I suppose I could speak with Mariani, who started a project called Multatuli, right? And if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Evi, you were actually at the Jakarta Post, managing editor, fantastic job, really credible organization, and you decided to sort of start this project. And Multatuli is actually the pen name of an author who wrote about Dutch colonization in Indonesia. So I'd love to know if there was a series of reporting or a moment where you thought, wow, this community is not being covered well, and I can't do justice to it while being part of Jakarta Post or a larger media. What was that process like?
So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I work for the Post. I work there for it's a legacy media, almost the only English media in Indonesia, kind of large before the pandemic, and smaller than. Because I worked there for almost 18 years, and I'm sort of like in a bubble, being trained like what I now call as a traditional journalist that think about journalism a certain way. So basically, like listening to all of your works, it's new to me because Project Multatuli is only 1.5 years, not even 2 years. So I was blown away with the thinking that I believe I did good journalism when I was at the Post, but it's funny to think that I believe that while I sideline millions of people actually, also in Indonesia, that we didn't serve at all. Because I have like former Jakarta Post reporters here, a journalist, three of them here, sorry, I didn't say that what we did was a mistake, but of course we did some good journalism there. But when I resigned from the Post in January 2021, I was presented by a whole new world of what we can do in journalism, like exactly what you guys did, and it was you were more veteran than me. It was totally new for me, because when we first we were founded by 4 journalists. All of them worked in established India in 3 different media outlets. Like 2 from the Jakarta Post, 1 from Kompas, like the largest daily newspaper in Indonesia, and 1 from Ito.id, also like sort of established, kind of not really established, but kind of big as well. So 4 journalists still working in their media outlets. We gathered, we brainstormed, and we decided to make something totally different from what we've done before. So we identified that the dominant practice of the media industry in Indonesia is first more serving the elite more than the marginalized. What I mean by marginalized is religious minorities and communities, rural people in rural areas, women, and lots of people outside Java, for example. So first, we want to disrupt the practice that serve the elite more. And then second, we want to disrupt the practice of male-centric journalism. And third, we want to disrupt Jakarta-centric and urban-centric media practice. So that's like kind of like a bold statement. There were only like 4 and then 7 of us. trying to define the challenge, like the whole Indonesian media industry that is predominantly owned by politically wired types. So that's the beginning of my story. And when I established Project Multatuli, and yes, right, Multatuli is like, he wrote something that Indonesian renowned author from India, wrote in the New York Times, said that the book was still colonialism, and we found that colonial practices still exist in Indonesia, and we want to like, share the truth about that. So yeah, that's when it comes to it. And when we started, I didn't see it coming. I actually was not really confident that it will be a success, because I was thinking that who wakes up in the morning and say that I want information from marginalized communities. No. So I was kind of like, okay, let's just try it. There's definitely there's an information inequality in Indonesia. Let's do this and let's talk with some audience. So we did a focus group discussion with 19 people, and then we did online surveys. Well, 600 people responded, and we didn't ask right away what do you need every day for your information, because if we ask that question, I won't get the answer we need, right? Because they will say that I need information about how to make DIY query, for example, or how to get you know, the so-called evergreen content, how to use that in 7 days. That's one of the most popular articles for 1.5 years at the Jakarta Post. Read that article. So we also want to like veer away from the market-driven stories, and we refuse to kowtow to algorithm. We refuse to produce journalism that serves on clicks, and clickbaits, right? So what we wanted to do was like kind of bold, and also we didn't really know that it would be a success. But and then after a few months, it turns out that a lot of people say that this is what we need, because we are tired of short 200-word articles featuring only one source, mostly officials and politicians, right? From Jakarta. So we need more like in-depth stories from coming from places that we didn't know even exist. So yeah, we received a warm welcome from the audience. Within months, I think our Twitter and Instagram followers grew to tens of thousands, and now we reach almost 1.5 years, almost 50,000 followers per each.
That's heartening to hear that you can actually set the agenda and, you know, sort of go against the whole model of we give the audiences what they want. And what I love about this panel is the very contrasting situations. And Meera, what you've done with Citizen Matters is kind of the flip side of the conversation, in the sense that you're looking at urban citizens, and you're also looking at a sort of a participatory journalism, if you will. Meera has been a fellow at Ashoka, which is a social entrepreneurship program, and is quite known for creating open knowledge systems where citizens can participate and initiate changes in their cities or propose changes. And Citizen Matters is a little bit along the same formula, where citizens from different backgrounds provide their perspectives on issues like infrastructure, education, healthcare, access, socioeconomic issues, etc. Right? So how do you maintain a certain standard, a certain level of journalism, given that these stories must be coming from very diverse people with different capabilities? What is the process from an idea turning into an article that is published on Citizen Matters.
So let me just start with, what we cover and how it's different from, pretty much what the mainstream media is, right? So your everyday, your newspapers, your dailies, your television are kind of cover what happened of the day. You have breaking news, you have, whether it's at the city level or at the state level. So that goes on. And pretty much the coverage is sort of episodic. So the last few weeks we've had like heavy rains and flooding in Bangalore, and everybody's covering the topic. But when it's sunny and dry, nobody talks about it at all. So we kind of just go back, and if you look at the stories now, you'd see it's the same. Like the copy would be very similar to what was published last year when it flooded, right? So there's nothing new. You're not really connecting the dots and saying what has been done in the entire year by the state or by whatever your from a governance perspective or from a infrastructure perspective that has led to this situation. Is it different from the earlier thing? Is it getting worse? Is there an impact of climate change? All of that. So things are complex, and we're talking about an Indian cities are huge, right? So Bangalore's 13 million. We are probably equivalent to Sweden. I don't know, Mumbai is some 20 million, probably like a pretty huge country out there. So it's very, very like, not just population, but the issues are also pretty complex, right? My own neighborhood has like, which elects a representative to the local city council has 40-50,000 people. That's like a small town in the US or elsewhere, which would have its own newspaper, but we don't have this. The coverage of local is like very limited that way. The city pages, and few cities actually have like a local newspaper. Okay? So this is sort of in a way led to, we felt it has resulted in the poor civic engagement. And remember, this is your local is your first contact point for your understanding of governance and engagement and holding the system accountable. It's, we can talk all about, the larger politics in the country, but we really don't have any control over, defense expenditure or some high level mining contract or something. We can talk about it. You may want to use that when you vote next. But at the local level, you actually have a chance to engage and influence and make a difference. So this is where I think sort of it's a huge implication for local levels, right? So that is sort of why we look at it in an in-depth way. We don't do like breaking news, daily news. We just take a step back and look at the larger picture. We look at system change. We look at why are things broken and how can we fix it kind of an approach. And the whole process is about enabling and empowering citizens to become change makers, right? There's just too many problems with the kind of numbers we're talking about. There are like millions of problems. You need millions of problem solvers. So that is the philosophy with which we approach this. And when you engage with citizens, and over the years we've worked with a lot of, we've had around, I think, about 12,000 odd stories and about 1,700 writers, out of which many, in the last slide, many of them are citizen journalists, bulk of them, right? You may have we have, of course, in-house journalists. We work with independent journalists and freelancers, and of course, experts, academics, practitioners, and so on. But we have a large pool of active citizens in the community who are engaged, who know their stuff. They know, for example, you would have somebody who's in an apartment committee talking about how to maintain a sewage treatment plant. Like Devi says, it's not like people are going to come and wake up in the morning and say, how do I fix it a sewage treatment plant? But when it breaks down, you need this article because it makes a huge difference to whatever, 1,000 households. So a lot of that kind of in-depth explainers, understanding, and that experience, the first-person narrative that comes in because of doing stuff is very, very critical. And that complements the what our professionally trained journalists go out and getting information from the government. And we also, of course, put in a lot of data and documents. So just to give you an example of how this whole editorial stewardship works. So we had this, there was this huge elevated corridor project that the government proposed, about 100 kilometers of raised roads around the city, costing whatever thousands and thousands of crores. And it wasn't clear on what basis it was, decided. And so we put out an explainer on what this project is all about, put out all the detailed project reports, the DPRs from the government, the budgets, everything out there that we could lay our hands on. And then we actually got a citizen who wanted to actually explore, dive deeper into it and what goes on. So we actually worked with him. He was a retired citizen. We actually had the time to go into this complex, like 300 odd pages of that report, environmental impact assessment report. And he found out like huge, issues. The fact that such a complex project costing humongous amounts of money, it was clear, like it got an environment clearance in just 2 weeks. And it did not consider the climate implications, did not consider the heat island effect, did not look at that thousands of trees are going to go. So it requires, and for a reporter to look at it, of course, there are reporters who would do that kind of thing, but there's so many such issues. How many reporters do we really have in our newsrooms, right? So you need this kind of patience, the diligence, the understanding also, of what is happening in that space to uncover this. So there's a lot of this whole process of working with citizens. It's not, we don't publish articles which are like letters to editors, right? We don't encourage people to rave and run and say, oh, this is bad, government should be doing it. And the other important thing to remember in local spaces, you can't always blame the government. The government is pretty much a stationary target, right? Everybody will say, oh, they are terrible, they are out there, this, that. But you look at the larger system of stakeholders, everybody is responsible. You have the real estate developers, you have the government, you as a citizen, many of us may have encroached some stormwater drain knowingly, unknowingly. All of it kind of feeds into the current, whatever the situation that we end up being. So I think that bringing that understanding and empowering people to kind of, with that understanding, the knowledge, the tools to the data, everything to catalyze change is how we kind of get things.
Thank you again for all of those examples, but the thread that you've tied, it's brilliant between, you said, civic engagement, accountability, and local journalism. And I think that really, those are the tenets of community-focused journalism, right? It is doing the opposite of what hyperglobalization did, which is you feel a strange combination of alienation from the rest of the world, as if this is uniquely your problem, but at the same time feeling that all of the issues are arriving directly on your doorstep. And community-focused journalism is definite, that still makes the local global connections, is an antidote to that, which allows citizens, which allows people in that community to, first of all, look at a problem and say, there is a solution that I can actually be part of discovering or exploring. So this has kind of turned a little bit into a meet and greet, because we're 8 people here with very diverse backgrounds. And I hope I did good enough of an introduction to each sort of outlet and editor, founder. I would love for you to get to know them better. We'll use the lunch to ask, the questions that would have been possible if we had another half hour. But how are we doing on time? Right? We have 12 minutes, so I would love to take just at least a couple of questions from the audiences.
And he'll bring a microphone over. Just over here, just for the Zoom.
Yeah, oh, sure.
It's for the audio won't come in on the Zoom. Yeah, it's on. It's on.
Done?
Yeah.
Thanks so much. My name is Courtney Raj. Really super interesting to hear about all of your institutions. I have so many questions, but I wanted to just hone in on one around the local news. How does your local news organization that is serving immigrant populations in the US, or if there are other, I'm sorry, like there's a lot of people here, but if it's relevant also, I think, to your institutions, I'd love to hear from you. But how do you think about your audience when you're serving a diaspora immigrant community? Is that audience, when you say, look, that audience, is it in the community you're serving, or do you also see that there's an audience in the home country? And how does coverage of, the home country influence, if at all, what you're covering for your local community? in addition to like the very, the local politics there?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, that's a good question. I think we primarily focus on issues happening in Minnesota that are relevant to communities of color who made Minnesota their home. So we cover education, climate, housing, environment, policing and justice and all that. And through the lens of the perspectives of communities that we try to teach. But we understand that some of the issues that we cover, say if a Somali person means a local seat in Minneapolis, for example, that that issue is interpreted by people in the UK, in Somalia, in East Africa, and other places that have Somalis residing there. One good example is we did a story, I think 2 days ago, about the first principal of Somali descent, who became a principal in school in Minneapolis. When we published that story, a BBC Somali journalist in London reached out to us to see if we can pass on the principal's contact information because he wants to do a story about that principal for the BBC Somali audience. So we understand that the issues that we're covering are primarily local, but they also reach communities and audience that are beyond Minnesota and who are interested in what's going on in the Somali community in the United States.
That's a very good question. I think you figure at on the pulse of why a lot of our exist. But for the Haitian Times, we are kind of like unique set of immigrants in this country because we have three things going for or against us: Black, we're immigrant, and we have language issues. We're not English speaking, unlike many of our Caribbean peers. And so our needs kind of unique in that sense, informational needs. And so when it comes to the homeland, that's not our audience. We think that we have enough of an audience locally here who engage on what's happening back home. So Haiti is like the product for us, it's not the audience. This is what people want to hear about. But at the same time, what's happening at the local level, for instance, Mukhtar talk about the principle of Somali descent. We have the same thing happening in Miami and New York. For instance, Central Brooklyn, for those of you who are here, is really has become, a Haitian stronghold where three of the police and commanders of Haitian. Miami has a hotly contested election of Haitians against Haitians. So that's kind of a new phenomenon. So we've gotten to the point where we're fighting against each other. There's sophistication level there. And so we have to understand that through dynamics and really cover the story that way. So this is basically what we do. And we have many different audiences. But again, the connective tissue is Haiti.
Anyone else with questions?
Hi, Nallu from Canada. We just established our journalism department. For those who don't know, we from literary and freedom of expression. So in this journalism department, we are really trying to focus more on local journalism. And one of the things that she we said on our listening tour is having inline rich resources, services. So one of the things that I was trying to push out is when to reiterate what Meera said, we're trying to do a lot of explainers, especially after the ordinary question. We wanted to do something that shines a light on the system without really focusing on any other side. But we always struggle to figure out how local do we need to go, especially because, in election, the democratic like this experience at the very local. if we want to go hyper local, I mean, data not that big. So we're struggling to figure out how locals should be allocate our resources. And how is the best way to approach that? Because research has said that it needs to be worn out of and in collaboration with the community. What's the best way for organizations like Pan America to allocate their resources without having offering and initiate, collaboration? So that would be my question.
Who would like to take that one? I suppose it could apply to many contexts. Would you like to answer that?
So the context obviously always different.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we found really useful, both at the Sowetan and in my previous life, I worked for a really hyper-local newspaper on the south coast of South Africa. And one of the things we found was to really kind of identify what the needs are as far as our audiences. So what are the kind of the top for us? What are the top sort of priorities? Issues, concerns, or whatever the case may be. So in South Africa, for example, it'll be issues of power, electricity, it'll be water, and that kind of thing. And when we try and allocate resources and obviously we don't have endless reporters kind of giving us information. So when we try to allocate resources, we really kind of theme what we believe the audience is wanting, and we open up channels of communication where they are able to inform us of yes, we actually care about this, or we actually don't care about this, we care about that, and we're able to kind of see how to allocate resources. So it's really around it's around themes that people are more interested in than anything else. And two, it's as I said, to open up that channel of communication. And sometimes, I mean, we do a lot of eventing, right? And I don't know, again, the context may be different for you. So we do a lot of real human events where we host these kind of conversations. And from there, we're able to, one, yes, because we report the story, but also we get a lot of intel around how, what the interests are and how people are wanting us to cover, the stories, different stories. And so even when we do that, that kind of punch up of, holding people accountable, we know exactly, what the nuances are in a community level that assist us to hold whoever is responsible, accountable for kind of delivery.
There's an organization called Hawkins, the woman who heads it is Jen Bendel. They have a program exactly like that. They're working with a lot of us local media outlets to really better cover elections. So I would reach out to her and she'll be a great resource.
Thank you.
And Meera had a comment, right?
What I was going to say, like your advice, which is like try to collaborate with local media outlets. Because at Project Multatuli, we only 14 people, and we declare that we want to disrupt the representative, but we 13 observers in the afternoon. So we realize that kind of like really hypocritical, right? If we are like sort of like not collaborating with local media outlets. In the beginning, we sort of like contract freelancers working in a lot of areas, but apparently individual journalists, freelancers who have worked with national or even international media outlets tend to think like the national media outlets, like the editors, tend to think like the editors in Jakarta. So we talk with more local journalists, and they say don't just contract freelancers, but also operate with us. Although we are small, but we admittedly have more resources, have larger network. So we find the money and give the money to them and let them decide what to cover. So we don't really like intervene. So.
Meera, as the concluding remark, probably.
I just wanted to say that based on my experience observations,
no number is really enough, right? I don't know the size of your community or the scope of work, but largely invariably it will be like to raise budget for an ideal number is going to be hard. So my approach would be to work back. I think how much can one raise? What would be a reasonable like sort of goal and say how many resources can we have within the team as well as who else can we collaborate with the community organizations, other media houses, universities, etc. And then look at sort of try to punch above your weight.
That's the end of it.
Three,
One more comment? Go ahead.
just one
Okay.
last comment, and then we really must conclude.
I think मैं पूछ रही थी कि ये क्या क्वेश्चन है तो जैसे बात हो रही ना कि जो राजनीतिक जो चीजें हैं राजनीतिक को कैसे यहाँ तक आने मुझे ये लगता है क्योंकि मैंने 20 साल से लोकल में काम किया है लेकिन बिहार छत्तीसगढ़ में
1 second. मैं translate करती हूँ और आप okay. So she's talking about how for 20 years they've been working at a municipal level with working on to effect changes in the government at a local level. शुरू कीजिए.
तो मुझे लगता है ना कि लोकल की मीडिया हर जगह जरूरी खबर ले रही है मेरे से चाहे वो अंतरराष्ट्रीय हो चाहे लोकल हो चाहे जहाँ पर तो खबर ले रही है ये खबर ले रही है कि जैसे आप अगर मीडिया को उभारोगे मौका दोगे सपोर्ट करोगे तो ही मुझे लगता है कि लोकल के मुद्दे चाहे क्लाइमेट चेंज हो चाहे पॉलिटिक्स के मुद्दे हो या
the summation there is basically that there is a need to support media at different levels, at the local, regional, and the international levels, for that to integrate, to work sort of in tandem. So it's not one or the other. You need to work in tandem and together for things like climate change to become solvable.
लास्ट में आपकी मीडिया में कौन रिपोर्टिंग करता है सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट ये बात है जैसे हमारे मीडिया में लोकल के दलित आदिवासी मुस्लिम ग्रामीण ग्राउंड पर रहने वाले मीनार और ग्राउंड की रिपोर्टिंग तब आपको मेन मुद्दे आप तक आएंगे नहीं आप शहर में बैठे शहरी रिपोर्टर बड़े रिपोर्टर पैसे वाले रिपोर्टर को आपको सतही तौर की रिपोर्टिंग मिलेगी क्योंकि मैंने काम किया है ग्राउंड लेवल पर तो मुझे उस चीज का अनुभव है क्योंकि हम ग्लोबल में बैठ के बात करते हैं तो ये सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट है.
If you want to really understand what is happening at the ground level, and if you want to understand issues impacting communities such as women from Muslim, tribal, scheduled castes and tribes, those sort of backgrounds, you have to put them at the forefront and not just as faces in interviews, but as actually women reporting about these issues and reporting them around the clock and not just as a tokenistic expression. And I think that is precisely what community journalism achieves. And I hear some grumbling stomachs and it's time for lunch. So, right, it's all you.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of the speakers and also the GroundTruth Project for helping bring this together. So maybe a round of applause for everyone.